Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and as always, my lovely semi-regular co-host, Heather Travis, is here with me today. Hello, Heather.
Hello, Melissa.
We are going to be talking about a really interesting topic today, I think, and it
Mm,
is creative rituals and the role they play in our creative process. So this is something that really interests me. I think I know it interests you as well, Heather. And I thought it
hmm.
was a nice contrast from our season opener where we talked about ripping apart our creative
Yeah.
process. And now we're going to be talking about the the ritual side of the creative process. So last
Hmm.
week it was all about changing everything up, and this week it's about having something that is comforting and that centers you,
Hmm.
that you do over and over again.
Hmm.
So it's kind of
Almost the
interesting.
non-negotiables for me, some of them.
That's right. And it's interesting how the two of those can work together.
Hmm.
So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we dive in, though, I do just want to remind you all, if you are listening to the show on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, I would love it if you would leave us a review or a star rating. It really helps the show get found, and so more people can um, enjoy the show and connect up with other Canadian creatives. And it only takes you a couple of seconds. You can do it right in the app while you're listening. And if you are watching on YouTube, we would love it if you would give us a thumbs up. Just hit the thumbs up button. And if you're really enjoying the show, please subscribe. And YouTube is a great place where you can uh, leave a comment as well, and we will see it and we can respond to
Hmm.
it, which is something I can't easily do through a podcast app. So, whichever way you listen, we're all artists and creatives and makers here. We know how important those likes and ratings and thumbs up are for algorithms, and it doesn't cost a penny. So, if you're enjoying the show, would love it if you would do that for us. So, yeah, let's get into it today. So, we're going to be talking about creative rituals today. And I think the important thing to stress here is that uh, rituals and habits are not quite the same
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
So, a habit often tends to be something that we do over and over again because it's a habit. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a good habit, um, or a
And
productive
oftentimes I
habit.
find habits are like without thinking.
Yes,
Like you just
that's the
do it.
big difference. You just hit the
Yeah.
button on on the
Yeah.
nose there. A ritual is much more about being intentional or setting an intention. And
Hmm.
it's really interesting. There's a lot of research out there as to how rituals can actually work with your brain to trigger a lot of things that are very important to us as working creatives. So that's what we're going to get into today. And why don't we kick it off, Heather, and talk about some of the things that we both do as
Hmm.
far as rituals. So, like when it comes to, okay, I have a few questions for you about this.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So, when it comes to settling in to start on a project, do you have rituals? And do you have different rituals for different aspects of your creative process, or even not even just your creative process, but your small business owner process? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, how does that work for you? Where do you kind of go when it comes to rituals?
One of my big ones is I, you could maybe call it a habit, because now to me, I've done it. It was ritualized so much for me that it's almost a non-negotiable
Hmm.
habit. Actually, it is a non-negotiable habit,
Yeah.
is cleaning my studio before I start a new project. And so I tend to just completely blow my studio up. Like it literally, there is dirty paint water, there's used paintbrushes that are not being cleaned properly, there's lids, there's stuff is everywhere. But everything in my studio has a place because I am anal retentive and everything has a place in my home and my studio. But as I work, it gets really messy. And so I have to start from ground zero. I literally have to reset and start again. And in fact, I have discovered that it cannot be. the same day that I'm intending to start the project.
Mm.
I have to walk into the studio, ta-da, ready to begin. It's almost like the fairies have to have visited before. It's like prepping a room to
Oh
paint.
yeah, I get
You
it.
have
I
to
get
go
it.
like move all the furniture out and paint and clean and tape and all the things. It's like walking in and it's just ready. I have clean water. I have all my brushes are clean and hanging. Every paint is in rainbow order. Everything is there that I may need, including canvases, like everything's there. If it's not, I can't start fresh. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something about the feeling of the room when you walk into it. It needs to have a
Hmm.
certain energy in it
Hmm.
before you can start. And I'm exactly the same when
Hmm.
things get too cluttered or chaotic in here, or if I'm starting something new.
Yeah,
Um, the room needs to have a feel to it when I walk in, because if it is
totally.
cluttered or chaotic when I walk in, I still get a feel, but it's not
Hmm.
a good feel. It's a very negative feel.
Totally.
Yeah,
Unless I'm mid project, like coming back in and being like, all right, where was
that's
I?
different. Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
very, very different. And I find funny enough, sometimes now when I'm stuck mid project, I'll sort of tidy things up a little bit just to kind of not, it's not a reset, but for me, it's just like, all right, let's just clean off, like, let's just dust things off a little bit, literally physically, but for me it's like metaphorical. It happens in my brain,
Hmm.
dusting the things off. And then the other really interesting ritual, and I was thinking about it, Avi, in anticipation of this episode, that I started during my exhibition process, simply because I was creating works inspired by so many living people, is that I ended up creating a lot of playlists to inspire the painting process that were specific to what I was sort of aiming to create. And so now I've started creating some secret playlists for myself that I don't have my on my public Spotify. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That are just it's just me in the studio and it's the oddest mix of music or sometimes literally all one artist. But I deliberately curate things that will because music is also sort of a non-negotiable for me in the
hmm,
studio. Uh, I listen to a lot of music. I try listening to podcasts, but then I end up just sort of standing, staring at my canvas with wet paint and drool dripping from my face, like, because I listen too much. Whereas music, I can listen to and just absorb, I can feel it and not, and continue my process. So, yeah, the
yeah,
creation of the playlist was a new one for me.
yeah. I think music
Hmm.
plays a really big role for a lot of us when it comes to creating, for sure. And I've often thought this is actually one of the first things we discussed when we started this podcast, me and Lisa, was creating monthly playlists to share with the
Mm.
audience to use in
Hmm.
their studios because
Hmm.
of um, the impact it can have for many of us when we're working on something. And I'm very similar
Yep.
too. I don't curate playlists, but I have specific playlists for specific types of tasks
Yes,
um, that I
I do.
will
I have
listen
that as
to.
well.
Yes, and
Yeah.
uh,
Chopin for taxes, as an example.
I, and some of them are on Spotify. I have one on YouTube that I watch. This is so funny. I really struggle to work during the summer because the
Mm.
weather's so nice, and I'm like looking outside and like, oh, I want to be out there, and
Yep.
and you got to do all these things to
Hmm.
make money, right? And so often, what I will do is there's a playlist on YouTube that is a cozy fall cafe with rain outside, and it has
Oh,
beautiful
interesting.
imagery. And I will just put my headphones on and listen to the sound of the rain and the music and the vibe of it all and try and put the idea of summer out of my head until I'm done my work.
Right.
And it's very relaxing music too. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. I agree with you. Like I can listen to podcasts and watch Netflix or Crave or whatever, but only when I'm doing very, very specific tasks.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't get me into a flow. They're just something to have
No.
on in the background when I'm doing, usually it's design
Correct.
or illustration, like when I'm actually drawing or actually designing and
Hmm.
I just want something in the background that I can absorb, but
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily in the inspiration phase of the
Correct. Like when I'm
project.
repainting furniture or reupholstering things,
Yes,
or when I'm
it's
doing stuff like that, that's what the perfect opportunity for actually active listening.
yes, because it's more
Uh,
methodical what you're doing.
totally.
Yeah, yeah,
Totally.
definitely.
And depending on, so if even painting murals, funny enough, because of the large scale of it, I find like a podcast does go very well. On occasion, music just to sort of perk me up. But I
Mhm.
have found I'm a very active listener. And I dance when like music is, I dance in my studio. So like, and I honestly look like I'm probably having seizures because it's such odd movements, particularly when I'm painting. But when you're doing a mural and you need to be precise and then you're like dancing like Elaine, exactly. It just anyway, it doesn't do the mural justice, so I have to sort of control myself. And sometimes funny enough, mural painting I do in complete silence. And that
Oh,
yeah, and not it's just me myself and my thoughts.
any others that you do? Like,
Not really. Like I don't there's no I will. I mean, I guess maybe it's just my child-sized bladder and my anyway, but I always have a beverage. Like I always not and when I say a beverage, it sounds like I'm drinking alcohol. I always have and in this case this is grape Kool-Aid, which I'm drinking because I'm a 10-year-old boy, but
it looks
I
watered
love
down too. I
it
think
is
your
watered
your
down.
mom
It's the
would be
drip.
proud.
It is. It's watered down. I'm trying to control myself. Um but yeah, so I always have to have a drink. The studio has to be clean. I usually have to also ensure that I have enough time. I really don't like being rushed. And I know, and so part of that is planning. Like I have to look at it and be like, okay, I have 4 hours that I have tomorrow to do this. That's enough time. Or I only have an hour. Okay, then this is the studio day cleaning. So like I kind of have to backtrack and plan things out because I really can't walk into the studio and I have to be ridiculously inspired to walk into the studio mid-mess and pick something new up.
Hmm.
Uh, and then interestingly, I've started a new ritual to shake things up.
Mm.
So does that, and it's funny enough, because of our conversation around shaking things up, I've started experimenting with different mediums and techniques and tools. And what I've started doing is actually when I experiment on those things, I'm trying to leave my studio. So like I did watercolors in the backyard. Uh, yeah, so I'm trying to like shake up the venue in addition to but I'm trying to create a habit out of it or a
Right.
ritual or, yeah, if that makes sense. I don't know whether that's habit, ritual, or just
I don't think it's a habit
fucking
or a
around
ritual
creatively, but
yet. I think it's more
yeah,
experimentation, but I could see how it could become a ritual.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I just tried to sort of, it's just adding new things and I might throw them back out, but I
Hmm.
don't know.
Hmm.
I'd like to pick up things and put them in my basket and carry the basket around for a while and see if it works. And then if sometimes, yeah, you just throw it. Doesn't work
Yeah.
or you don't like
Yeah.
it or not for now. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I get
Yeah.
that completely.
Hmm.
Um, I think for
What about you?
myself, yeah, I think for myself, I've mentioned this on the show many times. Making a cup of tea is very
Hmm.
ritualistic for me, and it's something I always need before I start anything. I need a cup of tea before I start recording the podcast. I need a cup of tea before I open Photoshop or InDesign. I need a cup of tea before I sit down to draw. Like it's very, it part of it is habit,
Hmm.
because I do it without thinking at this point. But there is also something about the process for me that is very intentional and very uh, methodic and very meditative. And one of the
Hmm.
things, and I've mentioned this before, that I love about making a cup of tea is you cannot rush it. Like
Hmm.
you can't make the kettle boil faster. You can't make the tea
Correct.
brew faster. It's
Yes.
just so you have to like settle yourself down,
Hmm.
like just chill out and wait for the kettle to
Yes.
boil, you know.
Yes.
And it's not going to boil any faster.
Hmm.
So very often when I am going through the process of making the tea, I have a tendency to kind of pace in my kitchen, and that is where I kind of bring all my thoughts together about what it is I'm going to go work on, and that is
Hmm.
where it becomes the very where it becomes very intentional and puts me in the right frame of mind. I don't get the same feeling from getting a glass of water. I don't get the same feeling from popping the top on a, a can of Coke or
Hmm.
anything like that. It is very much the process of making the cup
Yeah.
of tea. And I even tried to have a teapot in my studio, and I would just
No,
fill the teapot and bring it in, and then pour myself the tea when it was ready to kind of hurry the process along. No,
no,
it doesn't. It's not the same. So,
no. And funny enough, anytime I've ever tried to do that with tea, interestingly, I end up with a full fucking pot of tea that's cold sitting beside me because I
oh,
forgot about it because
I'm a
it's
tea
not
cozy.
part of the like process. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I will still make myself a pot of tea and bring it into the studio, but it's not with the same
Mm,
intention. And I have a
mm,
tea cozy for it, but it is nice when I
right.
just want to refill my teacup.
Yes,
So,
I hear
but
you.
it doesn't have the same effect. It's just
Right.
handy. It's like having a water jug and filling your water.
Hmm.
It's not the same. Um, the other thing that works well for me, and I don't do this prior to it's I rarely do this prior to starting a project, but I will occasionally. But this is more about when I am when it's not going well. And that's when I will get up and I will go for a walk. And there's something
Mm,
very, with no headphones, just
hmm.
and there's um in behind where I live, there is a big sports complex, but it is in the woods. And it's surrounding it
Perfect.
is a wooded trail. It's about a 1.5 kilometer trail, and I can go into that trail and forget that there's a sports complex there, forget that there's houses
Hmm.
around me, and I can just
Yes.
be in the woods,
Hmm.
and can just kind of soak it in and let my head clear and just kind of try to be present. I have a couple
Hmm.
of headspace uh, things that I will occasionally listen to if things
Hmm.
are really bad that are
Hmm.
designed to, they're like a guided forest walk that you can
Yep.
kind of do. I
Yep.
don't remember if that's what they call it, but they're very, very short. They're just a few minutes.
Hmm.
And sometimes, like, if I just can't get my breathing to calm down, or if I just can't get my
Yeah.
thoughts to quiet, putting my
Hmm.
headphones in while I'm out in the woods and listening to this. And it basically talks you through like how to appreciate like nature around you,
Yeah.
and how to
Yep.
breathe, and that will get me sort of calm.
Totally. Yeah. Well, because sometimes I need an external voice to quiet the voices in my head.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
To
absolutely. I
fo
think
like to
a lot of
focus
us
on.
do. Yeah, I think a
Yeah.
lot of us do. And I think particularly if it um if it's around a deadline, where the
Mm.
anxiety starts to creep
Hmm.
up and you're like
Hmm.
things just aren't working and you need to just get out there and just calm all
Hmm.
the all the adrenaline that's running in your system,
Hmm.
and the voices that are going in your head, and trying to get them to just settle down,
Yeah.
settle down. Uh, yes,
Yeah.
playing with a puppy also helps. Just, sometimes just, lying on the floor and just rubbing a dog's belly with them,
Totally.
like lying on the floor with them, staring up at the
Yes.
ceiling and just petting
Yes.
them
Oh,
can
yes.
really help as well. Would work with a cat. It would,
Hmm.
would work with a
Yeah.
rabbit.
I remember
Gerbil.
doing that with Eddie in the studio and lying down and being like, first off, delightful snuggling with him. And then I'd be
Mhm.
like, how did you get paint on you? How did you get paint on you? Every time I'm like, you're lying over here, I'm working over there. Like I did not flick paint that far across the room. How did that happen? Anyway, the mysteries. And then same vice versa. How did I find dog hair in
In my painting.
every painting?
Yes. But
Anyway.
yeah, there is something about just lying on the floor in your studio, staring up
Hmm.
at the ceiling for 5 minutes.
Yes.
Um,
I do, funny enough, now that we say it, and I honestly, I would never have thought of it as a ritual, but it actually is, and it's so funny. I would say that 99% of any session that I start in my studio, including a cleaning session, starts with like a solo dance party. I turn on really loud music and I dance for at least one song, probably that same song on repeat 3 times. And like, as Taylor Swift says, shake it off. And just like, I just, and it's like, I get all my wiggle jiggles out and then,
mhm.
and then I turn it to a different playlist or the same playlist, but a little less volume. That's when I clean, or that's when I start working. But I honestly didn't even think about it because it's just maybe part of Crazy Heather, but I have a dance party.
But yeah, it's kind of like getting the zoomies out before you need to settle
Yes,
into work,
that's
right?
exactly it. Yes.
Like dogs are really good at that. They go out, they have their zoomie, and then it's like,
Hmm.
huh, much better. Get
Yes,
on with
and
the
that's
rest of the
and
day.
honestly, that's exactly what it is. It's like that's why it could be two, three songs, and then I literally am like, okay, ready to work. Let's go.
Yeah,
Yeah. Plus,
yeah,
it just changes it honestly changes my attitude. It always puts me in
yeah.
a good mood.
Well, it gets
Uh,
everything flow. I mean, we're talking about flow
totally.
here and
Yes.
getting up and dancing, doing some jumping jacks, doing some stretches. It just
Yeah.
gets everything
Moving.
flowing in your body,
Yeah.
and your brain needs that blood and
Totally.
oxygen flowing to it
Yes.
to actually get things done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think movement is an important can be a really important part of setting a ritual or yeah. Yeah. And I
Hmm.
think that's the important thing that we're trying to point out here is like we sort of said at the beginning is that there's habits that we do, there's things we
Hmm.
do without thinking. And I do think rituals can get to a point where we don't think about them in terms of what's the way that I want to try and say this? Because I don't want to say that we're not thinking about them, because I think one of the key
Hmm.
principles of a ritual is it is something that is very intentional that you do
Yeah.
for a
Yes.
purpose. And I don't want to make it sound like we're not thinking about it, but I think it gets to a point where we just know in our core that
Hmm.
we need to do this thing to make all the other things
Yeah.
happen.
Happen.
Yeah. So
Yes.
it's habitual in that it's something we know we do every time we start something new, but it's still
Hmm.
intentional in that we understand why we're doing it and we know that it has to be done, and it's what sets the tone for
Yes, I think that's the thing is it's tone setting, and it's like the intention behind it is it's part of the greater, and it's yeah,
yeah.
I would agree with you. It's the intention behind it. It's the intention
Yes.
behind it.
Yeah, the intention is a huge part of it.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Um, And I think for those of you who are maybe listening, who are who think maybe this is all a bit woo woo, well, first of all, if you got this far, congratulations, you're being very
Yes.
open to this.
The Woo Woo Clubs meets Thursdays.
But the reality is, there's a lot of science behind this,
Hmm.
and in terms of how this can make a big difference for us.
Hmm.
And I am not a neurologist or a brain scientist in any way, but there is a lot of information out there on how these kind of things can help our neural pathways, and
Hmm.
how key rituals can be into entering that all elusive, wonderful state of flow that
Yes.
we need to get into as creatives to do the deep work or to do the
Hmm.
bigger projects. And we all know what flow feels like, but for a lot of us, it can be very hard to get ourselves
Get
into
there.
that state of flow. And
Totally.
that's where a lot of research, it seems to be, has shown that having these rituals can can help trigger that state of
Exactly
flow
that.
that we
That's
want.
exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I pulled it up. I'm going to see if I can find it. I found this on Forbes, actually, Forbes.com,
Mm.
where they were talking to a brain scientist, and he explained a little bit of how um, ritual can promote suppression in terms of tuning out our inner critic, who's
Yeah.
always shouting at us,
Yes.
and dampening brain chatter, centering and focusing the mind, and decreasing anxiety before executing complex tasks.
Yes.
And from what I read, it sounds like there's two parts of our brain that tend to be kind of yattering back and forth at us.
Hmm.
Um, and creating rituals can turn down one of those parts of the brain. It's almost like a volume on a radio, I guess, and you
Yeah,
can turn it
interesting.
down and make it quiet. It's something to do with our cognitive control network and our
Wow.
so anyway, a lot of big words and stuff I don't know a lot
Fascinating
about.
though.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so and I think if you are somebody who really struggles with anxiety, I think, uh, I know anxiety is something that I have a hard time with from time to time, particularly when I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Mm,
But this all sounds like having these creative rituals is one of the keys to turning down
yeah.
that anxiety that
Yep.
we're hearing or that we're
Yes.
dealing with. And I don't know, Heather, do you struggle with anxiety? We've never really talked about this.
Funny enough, I have until very recently, thank you, perimenopause, I have never anxiety, like if sure, obviously, like nervous,
I'm
I
not,
get
yeah, like we're,
but
getting up
that's
on a
different than
stage and things
anxiety.
like that.
Exactly.
Yes,
That's
but
very
like,
different than anxiety. And I only recently, like I had a panic attack like 6 months ago, and it freaked me the fuck out.
oh no.
Because I literally, and I called, of course, immediately called Brian, who was like, Heather, he sounded like he reminded me of that anti-smoking tape that Chandler listened to, but literally Brian was like,
You are a
Heather, you are a
strong,
strong,
confident woman.
capable woman. You will be fine. And I was like, okay. I was losing my mind. And so what I have learned is that I've learned some better self-regulation techniques. And interestingly, as we were talking, the dancing, and that's why I didn't think of it ritualistically, but dancing for me is a very effective self-regulation tool because it does get the zoomies out big time. It helps me focus on my breathing, and it also really gets me out of my head and makes me focus on my body. And
Hmm.
by just dancing, I then I'm 100%. And in fact, I'm almost because I think a lot of the paintings that I do are kind of silly or come from a sillier inspiration place, or at least whimsical, even if it's serious subject matter. I kind of need to like shake off uh the rest of the world and what they might think and literally dance like no one's watching and be completely free. And
Hmm.
I think that freedom is a self-regulation tool, but it's also like it's clearing the path to just do the thing
Hmm.
and feel the flow and all of that. But I think part of that is self-regulation and to yeah, to wind myself both up and down simultaneously, I think.
Yes, yeah. I mean, when you move, your body releases all kinds of endorphins and things that
Hmm.
like feel good endorphins, right?
Yeah. Oh,
That can
yeah.
really, um, yeah. I remember back when I had my corporate job, uh, and it was becoming unbearable, like unbearable.
Hmm.
I would come home and I would just put on my running clothes and I would go for a run and I would just run until either every drop of energy was drained from me
Yep.
or I felt like I was going to throw up because it was the
Yep.
only way I could, very graphic, sorry, but it was
Oh.
the only way I could get the anxiety and the stress and all the negativity, which I
Hmm.
had never experienced anything like that before. It was
Hmm.
the only way I could get out of my body was just
Yeah.
to just run it out, just
Hmm.
pure physically
Yeah.
push it out. Um, so I do think movement is a huge
Hmm.
part of dealing with anxiety for myself.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I've always had um, I think it's a hormonal thing, but there's always been points in the month where I will get this very
Yep.
edgy feeling, like just
Yes.
just edgy. Like I can't pinpoint it, but I can't settle.
Correct.
I can't,
Yep.
and the only way to get rid of it is to do something like you said, just go downstairs and just dance for half an hour, or
Hmm. Yep.
and walking won't do it. It has to be something
No.
really physical to just kind of
Correct.
take the
Yes.
edge off.
Funny enough, I'm a very fast walker in general. Like just my regular pace is very brisk.
Hmm.
And when I was trying to walk, I remember it was so funny because I had these earphones on and I could hear the guy, and it's just is my biggest patriarchal pet peeve is where you walking to so fast, little
I
lady.
know.
Like
Go
the
away.
shut the fuck up. I'm gonna drop kick you. And that I was like, all right, this is how we know that the walk is not helping me cool down because I could literally cross the street right now and karate chop you. It's like this is not, hmm. Okay. And in fact, what I ended up doing, because we live in such a rural area, is I changed the song on my, and I was in a wooded area and I had like a full on, and I remember the song specifically. It was Cake by the Ocean. And I literally was like in the middle of the woods. I'm like, now I feel better. I don't
Yeah.
feel like I'm going to assassinate some poor man.
And speaking of playlists, I had that is one time where I did curate very specific playlists to run the demons out,
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
where it
Yeah.
was just like I just needed that really
Yes.
loud,
Totally.
full-on music to just
Yeah.
deal with all the anger and the anxiety and the
Totally.
frustration and yeah. So
Yes. It's like
um
it's like watching a particular movie because you know it's going to help you cry.
mhm,
Like you
mhm.
just need to let it out a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But what I
Yeah.
found interesting in that article is they talk about how it can dampen, having rituals can dampen that inner critic.
Hmm.
And I've seen this mentioned in a few different places. And I think that's really interesting because who here, raise your hand,
Mm.
has never had your inner critic uh,
Hmm.
yelling at you,
Oh, big time. Big
right?
time.
We've all had it.
Yes.
We all deal with our inner critic. We all deal with feel fear of failure, perfectionism,
Mhm.
all of that. And the more I read, the more it pointed to the fact that rituals can really, really help us calm that voice or
Yeah.
shut the voice up
Hmm.
completely. And I thought that was really interesting. In the little bit I read from Forbes, there's talk about how it actually quiets the part of your brain that is very chatty. And I've read
Hmm.
other things about how uh, rituals can make you feel safe, like they create a
Hmm.
safe environment before you're
Hmm.
about to create. But I really thought it was just so fascinating how that the act of those rituals can actually quiet the chatter in our brain. Like that's
Yes.
fascinating to me.
Yes.
Uh,
I, honestly, that makes to me, I'm like as you're talking, that makes such perfect sense. And one of the reasons why I clean my studio is to part of it is the studio appreciation. Like regardless of I have a spectacular, huge studio space. Regardless of whether it's a corner in your room, whatever that space is, for me, clearing it and setting it up was part of adding, like justifying that I am an artist with a capital A.
mm.
This isn't a side hustle. I mean, currently it kind of is, but like but
You're
still, I
still an
still
artist
when
with a capital A. It can be
and
a
that's
side
exactly
hustle,
it
and
because
yeah,
and
that's
that's exactly it. And I tell people that my office job is my side hustle, that I am an artist with a capital A. And I part of that is owning it. And I think owning it is is kicking the little chatter box in the mouth in
Mhm,
saying, no, no, good enough. I am, insert whatever your title is with a capital,
mhm,
writer, filmmaker, photographer, whatever you are, create
mhm,
whatever you are, own that title. And I think part of the ritual is that it's like setting yourself up to, and almost interestingly, funny enough, I was on TikTok, so I'm sure it's true. But it was a neuroscientist and was talking about manifestation
mm,
from the and so like vision boarding, and which is so interesting because when you talk manifestation and vision boarding, it's like, oh, woo-woo talk.
mhm,
And then you neuroscientist, that's like not woo-woo talk.
yeah,
And she was basically saying that manifestation is in fact very real for your brain, and that it's not like you can just will things to happen. But if you see it enough and think about it enough, you will make it happen. You can't help but make it happen.
mhm,
And so I think part of the ritual, it's the manifestation of where we want to head. Like we're
mhm,
setting ourselves up for our anticipated goal,
mhm,
whether we know what that is or not, right?
yeah,
But you're setting yourself up to finish the new project, write the great book, develop the film, have the idea, noodle a project, whatever.
yes,
I think that ritual is part of that almost manifestation process where we're setting ourselves up to do
yeah.
the thing, to do the
It
thing.
it is amazing all the work that our brains do in the background that we
Hmm.
don't even realize they're doing.
Hmm.
And I do think you're absolutely right, is that by doing some of these things, whether it's a ritual, whether it is movement, those two things could be one and the
Hmm.
same.
Yep.
How that's exactly what we're doing. We are setting our brain up to do all that background work
Hmm.
without even realizing that's
Hmm.
what's going on.
Yeah.
And yeah,
It's like winding the old school. I just saw, you follow the
yes.
most delicious vlog, Martin Doulard. Anyway, Martin Doulard's vlog is just ridiculous. But he just got an old record player that you wind up, you remember the old, like really old ones that
Hmm.
you wind, and then it
Phonograph.
would play exactly,
Yes.
it would play the music. That's what the ritual is. It's like winding so that you can then be like, wing, and just go. And the thing that needs to help you move is in motion.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because as we I just had a thought. This just came
Hmm.
to me,
Ding.
I don't know if there's anything to this, but we look back at things that were created 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 400 years ago,
Hmm.
500 years ago, and the craftsmanship and the time and the energy that went into it to create these masterpieces. And I'm not saying there's no
Hmm.
masterpieces created today. That is not what I'm
Hmm.
saying.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
now, as humans progress, we're always looking for shortcuts to make
Hmm.
the process smoother, to make it more efficient, to make it
Hmm.
streamlined, to make things happen quicker. And I think maybe like these things, like the winding of the phonograph, the making of the
Hmm.
tea, like
Yep.
there is something about, and it's the same with
Like
how
making bread, like the
making
ritual
bread,
of it.
the
You have to wait for
kneading,
it to rise.
and just the physical act of kneading the bread.
Hmm.
We can use a
Hmm.
stand mixer to knead it for us, or a bread maker, but is it the
Hmm.
same satisfaction? The same with
Hmm.
washing dishes as opposed to putting them in the dishwasher.
Hmm.
I use my dishwasher, but when I wash dishes by hand, things
Oh,
happen in my
the
brain.
thinking, the
Yes.
thinking. Yes.
um but I wonder if sometimes we try to be too
Hmm.
efficient, like if we
Hmm.
almost need some of that. And why
Hmm.
the art of woodworking, now we can use laser cutters
Yeah.
to make those
Yeah.
things.
I'm
Not
totally with
nothing
you.
wrong with that, but
Yep.
it's not the same uh hand to brain
Totally.
thing. And it's
Yep.
the same, like, how many of us remember things better when we write them down as opposed
Yep.
to making a
100%.
list on our phone?
Yes.
uh I can make a list on my phone, and I do it often, but it doesn't
Hmm.
actually help me remember the thing because I have to go back
Not
to
at
the
all.
list to remember it. But if I want
Not
to
at all.
remember the thing, I have to write it
Totally.
down with a pen, and because there's something about that hand to brain.
Yeah, me too.
And I think that's part of rituals. A lot of the rituals
Hmm.
that many of us do before we start work are very hand to brain
Yeah.
focused. Making a cup of tea. um, uh, Another one that I know a lot of people do is lighting a candle. I'm not a candle person, so I don't do this one.
Excuse me.
But
Yeah, lighting a candle.
bless
I
you.
know. That's a lot of people do that as a ritual. I have a girlfriend that does that
I
for,
know so many people who do this as a
yeah.
ritual in their studios. But again, lighting a candle is a very physical thing. And
Hmm.
there's a difference between lighting a candle with a lighter and lighting it with a
Yes.
match, right?
Match. Hmm.
Same with a lot of people, their little ritual is writing in their journal for just 2 or 3 minutes before they start something, just to kind of clear their head. Again, and they're writing in a physical journal. They're not typing in a document on their keyboard.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I know.
I
I'm
think
I'm with
those.
you. Slowing things down, I think is a yeah, that's a big one for me
Yeah.
in terms of even just letting things happen. I'll go
So
back to Martin Doulard again.
yeah, go
Honestly.
ahead.
No, I'm just gonna say in terms of slowing things down, his YouTube channel is both meditative and inspiring all at the same time. And the amount of you see both such a beautiful use of technology and uh but also sort of historic. old school, tried true, slow, and like the whole process of what he's doing is a slow, deliberate, uh, anyway, and the artistry and the creativity and the cinematography and all, like it's just a feast for the eyes, it's a feast for the ears, it's all of the things, just in terms of the creative process. Sometimes we slow down and yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look him up. I'm not familiar with him at all.
Oh my
So
God.
I'll have to go check him out. But I get what you're saying. And I'm not saying that we should get rid of technology or that technology
Mm,
is not important to our jobs. It is, and we should
absolutely.
embrace it
Totally.
100%. But I do think that there's a place um for that slowing down and for using our
Totally.
hands and for
Yes.
making our brain do the hard work. And not
Yes.
that is, I mean, washing dishes is not hard work for our brain, but it, anything to do with water will put
A
me in,
number,
help me get to
I
a state of
joke that
flow.
I need a whiteboard in my shower because the number
Exactly.
of times and I
Yes.
scream from the shower. I'm like, Brian, take a note. Because I literally, I'm like, things come to me. And the number of people who at work, I get there, I'm like, morning, I thought of something. And they're like, let me guess, in the shower. I'm like, yes, yes.
I can't even tell you how many times I've started something with a sentence like this morning when I was in the shower. I had this idea
Correct.
because
Exactly. Which is so literally I walk in, I'm like, hello, male colleague. We don't need to call HR for this. Let's talk about my shower this morning. Yes, I know.
but
And even rituals, funny enough, I've been doing rituals for work and like ritual comes in handy I think simply to steady yourself and to set
mhm,
yourself up. And like, I'm even ritualistic about to-do lists. And like when you were talking about writing grocery lists, like I'm very ritualistic about writing a to-do list for the day and a list of activities. And if I have to accomplish a great number of things in my studio, in the course of a day, so like I'm XYZ canvases, so if it's not just like go create, make magic, I will make a list and the checking off for me is incredibly gratifying and
mhm,
reminds me that I'm making progress,
mhm.
particularly in things that are like for the exhibition, there were lists galore because I needed the ritual of writing, knowing, doing, and seeing complete was a
Yes.
very big deal for me to notice the needle going forward.
Yes. You just made me think of something actually. So I
Mm.
use a paper journal, paper planner, and I use Asana. And
Hmm.
Asana is for my is
Like tracking.
for the tasks. It tracks the
Hmm.
tasks. It tracks a project. It is where I put things that I can't forget,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
it's very much it's the task list. But at the start of every day, I sit down with my planner and I will transfer some of the more important tasks for the day into my planner and I will go through the process of thinking about them. And there is doing that in my
Mm.
planner with a pen and my hand and just taking a moment with my cup of tea to sit there and think about my day. That is not something I do in the same way when I'm just checking the tasks off in Asana.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
the act of sitting down with the planner open and writing,
Hmm.
and as I write each task I think about like how I want to
Hmm.
approach it, and it becomes a
Yep.
very it's very intentional actually. I
Yes.
don't necessarily think of it that way, but now that we're talking about it,
Hmm.
and I have never been able to shake having a an actual
Oh,
physical paper planner.
yes.
I will have
I'm
one
and
until the day I die. It's just
correct. Honestly, I wish I had all of my old ones because they're and because
I do.
I have lovely handwriting. And I am very intentional about the way even the page looks and how I write notes out. And my handwrite like will literally I'll be like, that's a pretty page. But I have a it's not a photographic memory by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm a very visual person.
Do you
I
remember
will
where on the side of the page it was and what color it was highlighted with? Yes,
100%.
I've been like that since a
Ah,
little kid. That's how I studied in
yes. And
school.
like my cue cards to do study notes were like color coded. That's how the way my brain works.
Yeah.
And so I can literally pull up. I don't remember what was on my to-do list. I remember the picture of my to-do list, and then
Hmm.
I can tell you what was on my to-do list.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly how I am.
Yeah.
I may not be able to remember the words, but I can tell you where on the page it was, which side of the
Totally.
page it was, what color I
Yeah.
highlighted it with,
Yes.
and it's very which helps me to find things quickly and
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Very similar to if I meet you at an event, I can tell you what you were wearing, what room we were in, probably what you had in your hand. I couldn't tell you what your name is though, because that just escapes me. But the other things I know. Anyway.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's all far more important than maybe we give it credit for, particularly
Hmm.
if, like, I honestly have never considered myself a woo-woo person, but in the last 10 to 12 years, probably since I became self-employed, I have just realized how much of these things that I wrote off as being silly or,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yep.
uh,
Hmm.
are now, like, now I'm starting to understand how they actually work, and they're not
Yeah.
silly and they're not
No.
woo-woo. There, there is something that is actually happening,
Yes.
scientifically happening in our brains,
Totally. Yes.
that
Like
is,
old wives' tales have their origin. Like the things that we've done for years and generations because we just did
I know we talk
that.
about cliches and things. There's a reason something becomes a cliche.
Correct.
Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yes. And so, in terms of, I guess, to kind of get us to a closing point here, in terms of, we've talked about a few of the things that we like to do. I will just give you a few others that were mentioned when I was doing a little research. And oddly, you and I, between us, have covered most of the ones that came up over
Oh,
and over
look at
again.
us. Look at
Um,
us.
but a couple that didn't get mentioned, one was doing things like morning pages or journaling, which we did
Mm,
briefly talk about here. But morning pages, if you are familiar with Julia Cameron and The Artist's Way, she morning pages is a huge part of that. I have
hmm.
done morning pages in some form or other for probably close to 2 decades now. That sounds very weird to say, but uh, yes, very, very helpful. Um, but also just sitting down and just doing, doesn't have to be morning pages. It could be 5 minutes in a journal before you start something.
Hmm.
And another one that was mentioned is actually doing meditation or breathing exercises before you
Yep.
start. And we didn't
Mhm.
mention this. I do meditate, but I tend to do it after I finished
Oh,
work
interesting.
as a way to kind of center myself and close the day
Right.
on my work day.
Right.
But yeah, it could absolutely be a very effective tool
Yeah. Interesting. I find my
to get
work is
started.
medit. I find my work is the
Yes,
meditation.
certain parts of my work are very much, and when
Yeah.
I get myself into the right flow, it becomes
Oh,
very
yeah.
meditative. But
Totally.
meditation and breathing in particular can really help you calm your body down and calm the
Big time.
voices in your head. So I can see how that would
Yeah.
be a really great one.
Yes.
And the last one that I'll mention is using affirmations or visualization
Mm.
techniques to get you into the right headspace, or to help you with your confidence, or just and we don't talk about this in the art world more, but elite athletes do this all the time before they go out.
Yeah.
They do
Yes.
particularly the visualization. Like, they
Visualization.
visualize the
Yep.
entire thing, from going out, the
Hmm.
crowd, the doing the whatever it is that they perform,
Hmm.
and then all the way through to winning and
Yes.
receiving their medal. So
Yep.
that's not one I have tried myself, but I think that could be worth giving a go.
Visually,
So
I used to do it for competitive figure skating. It's incredibly powerful, and visualizing the finished product and from start to finish. And I do it quite often when I have speaking gigs. I visualize literally
yes.
walking on stage, what that looks like, greeting everybody. I visualize desired reaction from the audience. I visualize closing, finishing, walking off stage, like, and even saying things like, I walk off stage with a steady and confident pace. Like, I think those things through, because otherwise, if you don't visualize that, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to get on stage. My pants are going to fall down. That's what's going to happen.
And the thing is, I bet when you were doing that, you weren't thinking of it as a ritual. You were just thinking of it as preparation. Like, this is how
Totally.
I prepare to go up on
Yeah.
stage. But
Correct.
honestly, that's what a ritual is. It's
Yes.
preparation
It's
to
preparation.
do the thing that we need
Yes.
to do, whatever that may
Yeah.
be. And in our case, for a lot of us, it's getting into creative flow. It's being able
Yep.
to actually create the
Yep.
work. Yeah. So I think if rituals are not something that you have considered,
Mm,
It might, hopefully this episode has given you some ideas of things you could try. But I hope we've also kind of made you think about it in a different way in terms of the science of it. And
hmm
I do encourage you, if you're curious about this, to go out and read some of the articles that are out there. There's lots of stuff online that tells you a little bit more about the actual physiological things that are going on in your
hmm
brain when you do these things, because there is science behind it. There is physiological changes that happen
hmm
and that make it easier for us to actually do the work that we need to do.
hmm It's
Um,
like setting us up for success. Like it's preparedness,
it
right?
is.
Yeah.
That's what preparation is exactly.
hmm
It's setting yourself up for success and making things easier for you, but also just bringing a little bit of calm to your day, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Which,
joy too, right? Like
yes,
calm
yeah,
and joy. Like
absolutely.
what do you, and that I think, what do
And
you
joy.
need to have, what do you need brought to the project? And I feel like everybody's, and I think that's what's unique about rituals is it's unique to the person and what they themselves need to bring to,
Hmm.
what do you need to bring to the space? Do you need to bring calm or do you need to bring high energy or do you need to bring like what do you, and we all know what we need to bring and that's where our I think that's what's most surprising for me about this episode and what we're talking about is that I know I had rituals but I didn't really think of them as rituals and so this has forced me I think to think about them and why I do it and actually understand it a little bit better
Yeah,
and now I feel like funny enough when I do some of those things it will be in fact more deliberately done
probably.
because I know it's like there's even greater clarity and understanding as to the rationale why, which,
Hmm.
yeah,
And I think one of the important things with these is you don't just have to do them at the start of something. Like if you hit
no,
a roadblock in your day or you things just aren't going right or you feel like you need a restart or something like
hmm
that, you can stop and take a moment and do. I mean, this is
yeah,
where tea comes in for me. I often, when
yeah,
I get stuck, that's when I'll get up and I'll go make a cup of tea because I know it's going to force me to like
yeah,
just
it's like a forced timeout.
settle down.
Yeah,
And it's quicker than going for a walk, but it has a
hmm
similar impact.
yeah,
And then there's times where I need to actually go out of the house
hmm
and do that. So um, I, you just made me think in what you were saying. I remember reading Twyla Tharp's book, and Twyla Tharp is a world-renowned choreographer, very famous.
hmm
And she talks about, I think the book's called The Creative Habit.
I think
Great
that's the
book.
name
I
of it.
highly recommend it
Yep.
if you haven't read it. But one of the things she talks about is at the start of every new project, she takes a banker's box and she starts filling it with anything that she thinks will help her with the project. So sometimes it's research, sometimes
Mm.
it's videotapes, sometimes it's things she needs to watch. And that becomes the base for her project,
hmm hmm
whatever she's working on. And that is kind of her ritual to start a
hmm
project. So it can also be a very practical thing. It doesn't have
Totally.
to be making tea or meditating or something. It can be
Yep.
something very practical that just
hmm
helps your brain, again, feel prepared.
Totally.
Yeah. So
Yep.
that's really interesting.
hmm
Um, shall we leave it there? Shall we wrap it up now? I think
Yeah. That was really interesting. Honestly, that got my brain ticking as it always does every time
yeah,
we
it's
talk. That yeah, got my brain ticking.
I knew this would be one of those episodes where I would really think
hmm
and I don't often
hmm
research our episodes, but this one because I felt like I didn't know enough about what I was talking about. I mean, I know I do
mm
these things, but I don't really
hmm
understand what's going on
Yeah, why?
and
Yeah.
physiologically. So it was
hmm
interesting for me to kind of start reading a little bit and be like, huh, okay, like there's a reason behind this.
Yes,
So
method to the madness.
method to the madness. So on that note, if you have specific creative rituals that you do, please feel free to share them you can share them in the comments on the YouTube video, or you can drop them in the post for this episode on Instagram or Facebook. We'd love to hear them because I think it's a really cool thing to to talk about.
Totally.
And who knows, maybe what you do might just be the thing that helps somebody else.
Yeah,
find what they
exactly.
need to get them going. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think we'll leave it there for this week. And on that note, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, if you enjoyed this episode, please, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button or leave us a comment. Both of those are really helpful. If you're listening on your podcast app, we'd love a review or a star rating. That, again, would be very helpful to getting the show found. And it tells us that you love us.
It
Which is
validates us.
always nice to hear. Everybody likes to. I actually did a pop-up market on the weekend, and one of the vendors came up to me and told me that she loved the show and she had been watching it on YouTube. I had no idea that she watched, and I was just like, "Oh, thank you for telling me
See,
that,"
you never know.
because you
You never
never
know.
know, right?
Exactly.
But it is so nice when you hear from somebody that
Yes,
that what you're doing is making an impact
totally.
on what they do. So. All right, everyone. On that note, that is it for this week. We will be back in 2 weeks with another brand new episode. And of course, Prep for the Holidays is continuing on through the Prep for the Holidays season. And
Hmm.
excuse me, Heather will be back with us next month for another new episode. We don't know what
Hmm.
it'll be about, but it will be
Nope.
interesting. All right,
That's part of
everyone.
our ritual.
Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you all soon.